Good morning, my friend. You've been pretty excited already this morning, haven't you? You're going to play with your friend today while I go vlogging, aren't you? Good morning, Ja! Well, good morning, my friends. It's your old pal, Jordan the Lion. How are all of you doing today? Great. I hope you said great as well. Today, we are heading off to the beach. And I think when you think of the beach, you probably think of one musical group, the Beach Boys. Today, we are going to do a special Patreon sunglass vlog. We actually have a lot of those to do in the future, so we're going to do one of those today for Marianne Geyser, or Man Geyser, however you pronounce your last name. I'm sorry if I mispronounced it. We are going to go see where Dennis Wilson, the drummer, the true Beach Boy of the Beach Boys, grew up, and we're going to see where his life ended up falling apart at the end. Come join me for a sad story about a guy that everyone that knew him just seemed to love. Daze with Jordan the Lion begins now. Alright, our first stop is basically down by the airport. We've been here a long time ago, a couple of years ago. Looks like we're going to be doing this one today in the rain. Alright, now we're transitioning on to the 105, which is the whole reason that the place that we're going to now does not exist and that there's a plaque there. Wonder why they didn't make it plural, since that's the name of the band, the Beach Boys. Well, as you can see behind me, there is a gigantic landmark here, because in this spot was where the famous Wilson brothers of the Beach Boys house was that they grew up in. I'm really happy to see this. You don't often see this near a landmark. You can see behind it there's the 105 freeway. That's what we drove to get here. And they ended up tearing down this entire neighborhood basically to build this freeway. Now, right here was where Brian Wilson, Dennis Wilson, and Carl Wilson grew up. Their house was actually on a corner, and there was a street that went through here, so their house would have actually faced this way. Now, right over here, across the street from them, would have been another house facing towards them, and that was the home of David Marks, one of the first members of the Beach Boys. It's a really spectacular monument they've put here. All the gold records going around are the members of the band. It says it was in the home here of parents Murray and Audrey that Brian, Dennis, and Carl grew to manhood, developed their musical skills during Labor Day weekend 1961. They, with cousin Mike Love and friend Al Jardine, gathered here to record a tape of their breakthrough song, Surfin'. This marked the birth of the rock group known worldwide as the Beach Boys and the beginning of a historical musical legacy that would change the recording industry. The music of the Wilsons loved Jardine and friend David Marks, broadcast to the world an image of California as a place of sun, surf, romance. Brian Wilson would become a legendary producer, arranger, and songwriter. And here you can see Brian, Carl, and of course Dennis. Now this plot of land is really important because this is where Brian got the sound. Brian grew up really standoffish from everyone around him and retreated into music. He was terrified of his father, who was abusive. Murray was horrible to the boys, and Brian just retreated into music. Now he created and heard this amazing sound in his head in the house that was located here. However, the problem was he wasn't a great lyricist and he didn't really know what to write about. That's where Dennis came in. You see, in the house that was here, Dennis would have a Stingray Corvette that he would go out and drag race. He would strap his surfboard to that car and he would go off surfing, and he would actually live the life that Brian would write about. Eventually, once they recorded Surfin' and Surfin' Safari and Surfin' USA and I Get Around, all those big hits that they would have, they would do a lot of those on Capitol Records, and Capitol was smart enough to release their records and their songs very frequently to have them out in the mainstream. But also it was really smart of them because the Beach Boys would eventually, as you saw on the plaque, become the face of California, Los Angeles Sun. So Brian ended up writing all of his lyrics about Dennis's life, basically. One side of the single would be a surfing or beach song, and the other side would be a car song. And Dennis was pretty cool about that too, because Dennis was known in this area for winning a lot of those drag races, being accepted by all the surfers. So he wasn't just a guy they were basing this off of. He was really living the life, and he was the one that, you know, when the Beach Boys became big, he was the one that everyone really saw as, you know, the coolest one of the group. Now, Dennis was not a natural musician, and he didn't really want to be. It wasn't like he sought out to play music. Brian needed a band, and Murray forced his brothers to be in the band. So they got a drum set, they got a bass, and they got a couple of guitars, and David Marks, their neighbor that lived over here, would become one of the guitar players, and they would force Dennis to become the drummer. So he was a self-taught drummer, really didn't play properly, but he could beat the heck out of the drums, put a lot of his rage in there, and kind of made it more rocking. Now, while they were living here and they were forming the band, Murray was always on them, because Murray wanted to control the group, and it was said that Dennis always took Brian's side. There was never a time in their life that Dennis was not on Brian's side. So anytime that Murray went after Brian, Dennis would get involved and Dennis would battle Murray. So a lot of the stories that you hear about growing up were Dennis fighting Murray. And David Marks actually came back here and was showing these locations and said he can remember one day, as I mentioned, their houses faced each other across what would have been a road right here. And he said both garage doors were open, and he said Murray and Dennis were arguing and pushing each other around in the garage. And he said my dad was in our garage and saw this happening, and next thing you knew, Dennis was throwing punches at Murray, and my dad had to go over there and break it up. Pretty crazy family life to have. Now, a lot of the area has changed. You can see it's much newer and bigger houses, but he did point out in what I saw a house in the neighborhood that very similarly resembled their houses for the time. So let me walk you over and show you. It's actually right over here. David Marks said this house is almost identical to what both houses look like. So when you see it, you'll really be able to envision this was their practice space. Not this particular house, but this is how it would have laid out. So behind us where their house was, you can actually get a feel for what those practices would have looked like back in that day, back in early 1961. So David Marks said literally this is how the house was laid out. The garage would have been right there for the Wilsons, and he said that window that's over there, that window was in their house as well. And so David said I used to go and spy on Brian working on music and like pop my head through there and say hi to him. So the band became huge. Brian Wilson eventually decided to quit performing with the band, and then eventually just withdrew to his bed and really was inactive for quite a while. So Carl and Dennis were taking over things, and eventually Dennis would get heavy into drugs, but he had this musical feeling inside of him that he had to get out. So he was the first one out of the group to go off and make a solo record. And boy, what a record. It's kind of been forgotten, I feel like, but what a beautiful record it really turned out to be. It was the only one he ever released. He worked on a second record, but he said that he put so much heart and soul into that record, and it was not really received. He said, I found a quote where he was telling someone, nobody listened to it. I just don't have thick enough skin to take putting my heart out there and no one care. Even my brothers didn't listen to it. So Dennis ended up having quite a dark time. He ended up befriending Charles Manson, who would then have his followers, the family members, come live at Dennis's house, and Dennis couldn't get rid of them. They were destroying his house, going through all of his money, and a lot of times Dennis would go stay with friends just to get away from them. And in fact, Charles Manson threatened his life because Dennis had felt that he was owed money, and he at least said he and Charles had co-written a song, Cease to Exist, together. He changed one of the lyrics to Cease to Resist and then took it into the Beach Boys. They arranged it and released the song, and it was called Never Learn Not to Love. And when Charles Manson found that out, he was furious because he said, you can do whatever you want to me, but you don't change my words. And he showed up at one of the houses that Dennis would stay at, just barged in. Nobody knew how he found out that he even was staying there, and told Dennis if he didn't give him all the money and everything he had on him right there, that Charlie was going in, you know, in return for stealing his song, he said he was going to go kidnap Dennis's son. So now we're going to head off towards the beach, and I'm going to show you a little bit more of Dennis's life towards the end. It's kind of a sad ending. He was so into the drugs and everything that he really, his body couldn't take it. His voice started to get shot, and he would have to have Carl come in and sing on recordings because Dennis physically couldn't hold the note or hit the note anymore. Pretty sad. Eventually he also was banned from the Beach Boys. He was fired from the Beach Boys, was not allowed to attend performances for a long time because he was showing up drunk or wasted or was picking fights. He actually got into a altercation with Mike Love on stage, which seemed to be the last straw, but a lot of times he also just wouldn't show up and was undependable. So let's head over to some of Dennis's final hangouts. Well, the rain had stopped long enough for us to stop and do that first part. Now it's raining again. All right, there's the sign for 5th Street. That's what we need. In 1954, the Beach Boys opened their own studio called Brother Studios. Their record label was Brother Records because Carl, Dennis, and Brian were brothers. And we are here at the location, or the former location, of where they opened up that studio. Where this yellow building is 1450 and the address was 1454, so it would have been right here. Back in 1974, the Beach Boys opened their studio, and Elton John used to use Brother Studios. Also, the Runaways recorded there, but this was the haven for Dennis. When Dennis was, well, Dennis had been married quite a few times, and the marriage that he was going through at the time of Pacific Ocean Blue was really tough on him. And they had actually been married, divorced, and remarried again. And whenever they would have fights, and apparently it was a pretty tumultuous substance abuse type relationship, they, you know, whenever they would get into a fight or anything, Dennis would be sad and he would come retreat either to his boat, the Harmony, where we will eventually end up where it was docked, or he would come here to Brother and he would work on that album that I was telling you about earlier, Pacific Ocean Blue, that was just so amazing. He also did a follow-up to that that never came out called Bamboo. But while he was working on those sessions here, the studio was starting to fall into financial trouble, and Lindsey Buckingham of Fleetwood Mac was a big Beach Boys fan, and he decided that he might be interested in purchasing it for the band. And so Fleetwood Mac were coming here, hanging out quite a bit, thinking about buying the studio, and Dennis started hanging around and was hitting on Stevie Nicks. She didn't seem to be all that interested, but Christine McVie was really taken with him, and Dennis started dating Christine McVie and hanging out with her and basically going and living with her when he wasn't on his boat. And since Fleetwood Mac was selling a lot of records and making a lot of money, she could help facilitate some of his habits because he was really blowing through money quite quickly at this time. In fact, they said throughout the entire career of the Beach Boys, he never really seemed to care about money. He wouldn't attend any business meetings or do anything that could financially benefit him in any way. And eventually, he was spending so much time with Christine McVie, they were often fighting. A lot of people said they thought that the studio would have been basically right about here. A lot of people thought that he was really more enamored with her money and her fame and everything, and the lifestyle that he could keep up with than her. But he would go over when they were having fights to her house, and there was one story where he had the gardener plant a gigantic heart out of different colored roses in her front lawn and then stuck her with the bill. But eventually she just kind of got tired of it and eventually just parted ways with him. She said later that being with Dennis, he was half little boy and half insane person. The Beach Boys did eventually sell Brother Studios, but they did not end up selling it to Fleetwood Mac. It was sold to someone else and it was changed to be named Crimson Sound. Social distance seating, no more benches. That's a fair point. So weird to see the whole world shut down like this. Even Santa Monica, I mean, there's just never a time where it's empty like this. Our next stop is here on Ocean Avenue, Dennis's favorite bar hangout. Take a look at this. They fenced off the whole park. You can't even get to the Pan Pacific Park out there on the pier. That is crazy. So now we've made our way over to Chez J. I have vlogged this before. If you'd like to see the inside, they're actually closed right now because of the pandemic stuff. If you'd like to see the inside, I've vlogged this once before. This is really cool because this is the place that the Regal Beagle from Three's Company was based off of, but this was Dennis's hangout. This was his local watering hole. You could find him here pretty much anytime he wasn't on his boat or in the studio. He used to hang out here quite a bit, and actually right through the front door you could actually see his seat right on the corner. I believe I kind of showed that in my other video. This place is very, very historical. But at the time that he was 39, this was 1983, he was living a fast life. He was falling apart. His body was falling apart. His marriage had ended for the second time. And now he met another woman named Shawn Love, who apparently was claiming to be the illegitimate love child of Mike Love, who was one of the Beach Boys. She had a thing for Dennis, and Dennis started to date her. Now what's interesting about that is, bad enough that he would date someone who claimed to be the daughter of a band member, but Mike Love was also his cousin. Now at the time, Dennis and Shawn Love got married, so that was Dennis's 5th marriage, and they were actually living across the street at this hotel. At the time it was called the Santa Monica Bay Motel, and they were living there with most of their friends living near them, and they liked this place because they said they could look out their window and see if anyone was sitting in their bar seat right here through the doorway, because this, usually when they're open, this door is always flung open. Dennis pretty much lived in that motel for the last 6 months of his life because he ended up not paying the bill for his boat, the Harmony, and lost that as well. Look at that big mural to Tina Marie up there. Here you can see a really empty Washington Boulevard. They used to call Dennis the mayor of Washington Boulevard. Here you can see the sign says the beach is closed. And right here is NYX Liquor. This was Dennis's favorite liquor store. Now they said Dennis every single day walked around drinking, and what he would do is he would come here, actually park his car right here in the red zone with his dog in it. I found a report of a guy that used to see him here all the time and said he would always pull up right here, run in, and he would get either a bottle of vodka and grapefruit juice, or he would get, what was it? Orange juice and something else. They said he would always run in here, get it, and then he would immediately pour half the juice out right here on the ground and then pour the entire thing of liquor inside the juice and walk around with that the rest of the day. There you can see the counter he would have gotten his liquor at right there. In the article I found where they were talking about how frequently he would come here, one of the gentlemen that used to see him here said one time that he said, "Hey Dennis, I really love Pacific Ocean Blue." And he said Dennis got like glassy-eyed, like he started to tear up and said thanks. And he said, "Are you gonna do anything else? You gonna release another solo album? I loved it." And he said Dennis looked at him and said, "It's too hard, man. I just can't do it. It's too hard to put my feelings out there for no one to care about." All right, we're gonna go and see where Dennis Wilson's surfing days ended. The real beach boy, where he ended up drowning in 1983. All right, we're gonna take this public access path down to Basin C1100. That's where Dennis was partying that last day. Man, this is so crazy to see. Just kind of gives you weird vibes. Dennis's music was just absolutely amazing, really. Go give Pacific Ocean Blue a chance. A lot of people don't know how great of a musician, what kind of great music was rolling around inside him. In fact, a lot of people don't know that he co-wrote "You Are So Beautiful." Billy Preston gets all the credit for that, but they said when the song came out, Dennis heard it and said, hey, I co-wrote that. Also, one of his greatest is a song called Forever. Give that one a listen. All right, we finally made it. So this was it. This is the gateway to the dock that led us to where the Harmony was docked, even though Dennis didn't own it at the time. He was friends with everyone out here. And actually, if you see where those guys are down there working, Dennis's last day was spent right where they are, right over there. Because you can see where those gentlemen are standing. That day, Dennis was out here drinking with his friends off that boat, and he was diving. He was throwing his possessions like watch and different things off the side of the boat into the water, and he was diving down to retrieve them. And eventually he was doing it enough that they said that he hit his head on the part of the dock when he came up and then went down, and for 15 minutes they were waiting for him to come back up. He never came back up. They were down there looking for him, and the water was only 15 feet deep. So they eventually had to call for help, and they came and drug the water down there, and down at the bottom in the fetal position they found Dennis Wilson down there curled up at the bottom of the ocean floor. You know, everybody knew Dennis probably shouldn't be out there swimming that day. He was a strong guy, but he was inebriated, and like I said, he was not in the best position in his life. People had seen him for the last couple of weeks wandering around barefoot with no shirt, just kind of disheveled, and one of his friends said when they found him, he was in a fetal position, which is very strange because he said people that drown usually look like they're trying to grasp for help or to, you know, something, but they said when they found him down at the bottom, he was down there curled up peacefully. That was the end of Dennis Wilson. And he ended up after this being buried at sea. So Dennis has no headstone or any memorial to come visit him at. It's too bad there's not some sort of little memorial here or picture or anything for him. I'll walk us over here to this side and show you a different angle as to where he would have been diving and where his boat was. Looked like online the boat was the second to the end on the right side as you walk down the dock. So it would have basically been in the waters down there. All of Dennis's friends said he absolutely loved the Harmony, and it was really heartbreaking to see him lose it. So it's probably fitting that he passed away here at the Harmony. I would love to know what happened to that boat. Wouldn't you? A sad story to a great musician. I've never seen that sign before. Tsunami evacuation route. And that was the sad, sad story of Dennis Wilson. Alright, my friends, we're gonna call it a night. I hope you enjoyed that vlog. Marianne, I hope you enjoyed that as your Patreon sunglass vlog. And go listen to Pacific Ocean Blue. Think you'll love it. Great work of Dennis Wilson. I want to thank Lori C., Rachel Han Schumacher, Jennifer Swibert, and Janetra68 for becoming my newest Patreons. Everyone else, we'll see you next time. Have a great night, and goodbye.